We're really excited. He's going to talk with us, give us a talk on measuring happiness, health, and social stories with a big data way, which is linked to his, is it hedonometer?
Yeah, right.
Okay, I'll angle it, but
That's okay. I do say hedonometer, but you've got to go to the ometer at some point. But yeah.
Hedonometer.
Okay. Hedonometer. Yeah.
Well, welcome.
But you can do whatever you want. All right. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, James. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, so I have a whole bunch of things to show you. It's going to be kind of a broad-ranging talk. There is very much a big data element to this, and there's going to be a lot of description of what we see with the particular instrument we've built. But I'll get towards the end to something that I think is perhaps a little more fundamental about human behavior. All right, this is just a little ad here for you. So we are hiring someone for someone it's in complex systems in general, but certainly we're looking for someone in social sciences probably, to be honest. All right, okay. So let me get this thing to work. Yeah. All right, so as I said, yeah, I'm going to tell you about this hedonometer business. We're going to be measuring happiness from text in general. And Twitter is a fun thing to play with. That'll be part of what we do, but we'll also look at books. We have 10,000 books from Gutenberg, the Gutenberg project that we've stuffed through our instrument to have a look at. And then we'll get on to some other pieces later on that come from all sorts of text corpora. Okay. So, all right, there's a team behind this. So as James said, I have a group that I co-run in this strange way for academics to actually behave. We are a collaborative team, myself and Chris Danforth, and we've had a whole bunch of really fantastic, interesting students who've gone off to do all sorts of other things. And we keep adding good people. So yeah, it's a computational story lab, which I think grabs what we're trying to get at. This is, instead of my CV, this is my summary of my work. So you can see, I'd like to throw this up. So networks to start with was all about, and it was in some sense the 1990s big data sort of story. River networks to start with, continental scale stuff, and there's a small world story in here. There's a lot about contagion. This music lab experiment some of you might know about fame, and then it starts to blend into happiness and language. So we've done a lot of work recently on Zipf's law and everything to do with that. So yeah, all right, so let's get some background in here. So this is something I've been carrying around for a long time, since 2007. I will play a little bit of video at times, and I think it's just going to, the audio is just going to come from this machine, so that might be a bit of a struggle. All right, well, let's read out Greenspan. So this is 2007, so things happened after that time. I've been dealing with these big mathematical models of forecasting the economy. If I could figure out a way to determine whether or not people are more fearful or changing to more euphoric, I don't need any of this other stuff. This is a bit of a, he goes a little strong here. I could forecast the economy better than any way I know. So that's a little optimistic. Goes on. Trouble is we can't figure this out. He's been doing it for 50 years. I'm no better than I ever was. No one else is. It's as bad as it was 50 years ago. The reason is that human nature hasn't changed. So this is just spinning out of him. We can't improve ourselves. So he's just, this is not a carefully crafted statement, but it was on the Jon Stewart show. This is worth watching. It's very interesting. If you want my slides, I'll put them up later, and you could get to them. All these things are clickable. Yeah, the whole interview was quite an interesting thing, and that was Stewart's very high-level response. But there's a bit of a setup, right? He wants to throw all these mathematics away. All right, some other things about happiness. So this is Robert Kennedy, measures everything. This is the GDP, measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile, and it can tell us everything about America except why we are proud that we are Americans. All right, so I'm going to knock the GDP a little bit. Obviously a very important thing, but it's not the only thing. And what we're trying to add here is another dial, if you like, to the dashboard of society, which of course you don't want to focus on solely itself. All right, big data is this big thing now, and I tend to frame science as describe plus explain, and then create and share, and all these good things come after it. Lord Kelvin possibly said this, to measure is to know, so these are good things. I like this, and if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. Also said some things like, there's nothing new to be discovered in physics, all that remains is more and more precise measurement. So quantum would have been a bit of a surprise. X-rays will prove to be a hoax. You know, the usual cherry picking with quotes to start your chapters in your books. All right, so happiness. So there's a history here. We have people who have been in pretty good situations starting to talk about happiness. You know, we don't have how the people who weren't recorded, what they thought about happiness, but when we go back in history, we'll get to that now. So the Greeks talked about eudaimonia, which was sort of this idea of flourishing, right? So flourishing, that you reach your full potential. That was interpreted and recast in different ways. So some of them it meant wine and food was a good way to find happiness. Quite literally, this is how it was described. Bentham came up with this notion of the hedonistic calculus. So the action you should take, that you should take next, or in some situation should be based on how much it will maximize the happiness of the mass, essentially. And Jefferson, so the pursuit of happiness, which is tacked on to the writing that they were putting together there. So here's an early draft. So it was life, liberty. It actually was property, I believe. From that was in the early draft, but they scrubbed that one and put in the pursuit of happiness. So, and it's kind of stuck. People like this one. All right, so happiness. Everyone wants happiness. So, so it turns out that's, you know, from studies in the social sciences, this seems to be what actually people will say if you ask them straight up, what do you want in life? There is evidence that people who are happier live longer. Now, you know, that doesn't mean they produce better things and all sorts of stuff, right? We may need some level of grumpiness if we can really measure that for things to function well. So this is a well-known aspect that this is GDP here, or GNP, that the happiness levels, and these are measured by surveys of countries, tend to plateau pretty quickly. So once you get above a certain subsistence level, then it flattens out. Bhutan famously said, we're not going to make any money, so let's maximize happiness. So they have their story for gross national happiness. And various other places around the world try to measure the well-being of their people through large-scale surveys. So I think the UK, they might call up 20,000 people, something like that, every couple of months, and ask them how happy they are, which is, you know, a bit of a weird thing to do, right? How happy are you? On a scale of 0 to 3. Like, who's calling, right? The government wants to know. So, and of course, surveys are incredibly important. There's no problem with that. They have their own complications. What we've kind of ventured off into here is something that's complementary to that work. Easy knocks, you can say all these things, that the science is all well in, because we're going to be watching people through, say, Twitter and so on. And the bad policy that you end up with if you just focus on something like well-being, just happiness by itself, is you know, Brave New World sort of stuff. All right, so we get that out of the way. The search for happiness is one of the chief sources of unhappiness. That's Eric Hoffer, who was pretty good with his aphorisms. Here we have Colbert, happiness is totally overrated, another fun interview. Happiness is for the weak. That's pretty great. So people have different views about happiness. I don't know if this will play properly. Can you hear this? Maybe it won't play.
Before she died, Colleen told me she just wants me to be happy.
Really? Because it doesn't sound like her. But
Just want you to be happy. You know who you say that to? A loser. Someone who can't hope for anything more in life than just being happy. You say that to someone who has disappointed you.
Jack.
No, it's perfect. She's a genius. One last twist of the knife.
Okay. All right. So there are complicated views of what happiness should be. Let's move. Oh, get past that. So I've got a few things, but let's move on and all those things aside. All right. So we want to build a happiness measuring instrument. We'll call it a hedonometer, and it'll get changed into some other word. So quite reasonably, that's how language works. So we want to do this thing where we're remotely sensing, as so many other fields have done to their success. Emotional states in general, and it'd be great if we can do this in real time, or simply, get it a text and push it through our machine. And we want a whole bunch of things, right? We want it to be transparent. If I'm going to tell you that this text is happier than this one, I need to be able to explain why that is. So that can be very much a complication with some of the NLP stuff, which is very sophisticated, but we'll give you something that's simplified and will work. We want it to be fast because we're getting to web scale kind of data. based on written expression, now certainly you could start to think, oh, maybe Instagram and all sorts of other pieces. You've got image analysis. And human evaluation has to come in there somewhere. It can't be done in real time, but we need something. Non-reactive is to say that we're not going to ask you. We're going to look at how you're behaving. And as I said, something that's complementary, that builds on the self-report or the survey-based methods. And these things can be done in different scales and in different ways, and hopefully they either agree or they show interesting ways in which they don't agree. So, and it's improvable. And I'll show you that we did improve it. So I'll actually give you some of the initial version of this instrument, which it feels very much like to us, it's just a property of language that we were able to build something that in the manner of, say, a telescope, you make it, you can see a certain way, you make a better lens or build a bigger telescope, you can see what you saw before, but much more resolution. So that turned out to happen. We could have built a better, what we thought was going to be a better lens, and then seen something completely different, because it's language, it's not obvious, right? If you're building a bigger lens, you think, okay, I'm going to see further. You have that in your head. But I will say that this was a nice feature of what we did. Okay, so the word in psychology is valence for happiness. And if you see the way this was described back in this study, ANU, it's very much that kind of, that's the idea that people are looking at there. The more standard kind of idea of happiness. So this is a study that was done at the University of Florida. There was this simple 1 to 9 scale, and people were presented with 1,000 words. Obviously, there were students who were forced to do this, and in the great tradition of these kinds of surveys. And you simply just colored in which one, right? So you're given a word, and so there's church is in there, pancake, truck, paradise, murder. There are all these words, so you just fill it in, all right? And then we get an average. They produced an average for men and for women, for male and female survey takers, and then an overall one. All right, so they did this, and there's a old work in psychology that breaks the emotional spectrum into 3 main semantic differentials, right? So this is an excitement scale. So in perceiving whatever it is in front of you, we're talking about words, but it could be any event, something. How excited do you feel? How happy does it make you feel? And how much in charge do you, how powerful do you feel, right? So those 3 dimensions have long been used. And of course, there is evolution of this as well, but this is an old, this work, this ANU, the effective norms for English words, built on this breakdown. Okay, so this is where we came across this study and thought, all right, well, maybe we can use this for text. And I will say that before that, we used all sorts of other things that failed miserably, right? And this is the way science works. With things that didn't produce any signal of any sort, didn't show us anything. But we were pretty sure we could measure emotion in some way. And I'm not sure if I have it in here. WeFeelFine.org. Some of you may know of this. It's a site that first appeared in 2006. Jonathan Harris and Sepp Kamvar. Kamvar is now at the Media Lab. Jonathan Harris is an independent, very interesting character who's a computer scientist / artist. He's done all sorts of interesting projects. But that was our inspirational start. So they were getting blogs. Remember blogs? Blogs used to exist. You would get a sentence from a blog that said, I feel something, and then they would try and extract the word, right? Just, I feel sad, they would take sad, and they made a very nice visualization. Again, it's 8 years old. All right, so this is the very simple thing, and we're moving to more complicated things, but this has turned out to do quite a lot for us. So it's a temperature-like measure, and I'm giving you a tiny example, which isn't a good example, and that's important, right? So, but it is Michael Jackson, so that's cool. All right, so you go through a text, and in this case it's Billie Jean. You find the words for which you have an average score based on this survey. So we have 1,000 words, and it turns out these 1,000 words don't cover any of these, but they lie and truth and love and so on are all sitting there. Words have great ambiguity, context matters. That's something we can talk about. And then you simply count them up. This is the naive thing to do, count them up, and here are the underlying averages. So lie is perceived to mean lie by people on average, so 2.79, it's a very negative word. So again, the scale is 1 to 9, 5 is neutral. Love is a very positive word. So you have a weighted score, right? You have the counts and you have their averages, you weight the whole thing and you get an average. So this is a pretty, and I'll show you lots of other examples, but this is 7.1 for Billie Jean. All of the album Thriller, you get 6.3, and Michael Jackson's complete set of works. 6.4. So this is and I'll put this in some context as we go on. All right, so Billie Jean, complicated song, right? So this is not really, we will not tell you that this is a good measure for it. But maybe when we get to Michael Jackson, we're getting a little bit better. Certainly when we get to all the pop songs in 1984, we've got enough data there, enough words for us to really sort of be much more confident about what we're measuring. So, on the order of certainly 1,000 words, 10,000 words, it's good. And this is this poor lens, in a sense, that we started with, this rudimentary lens, because it's missing all these words. We don't have scores for them. So it's a temperature-like measure. We want lots of words to go into our measure. Certainly, we would never measure anything that's small, paragraph, sentences. That's just no good. We can't tell you how they score. We don't score them and then aggregate them. There are methods that do that. And I think this is quite reasonable. I mean, it's hard to process a sentence, even especially just a text one, for people sometimes. So this is this simple-minded thing. And we'll see later on, this actually gives you, quickly perhaps, this gives you a tunability. Actually can be tuned in a way like you might with a microscope. You can change the resolution. There's a particular way we can do that. All right, so this is using, again, this rough version of the instrument. This is music lyrics. This is 1960. And this is not based on popularity. It's just, let's take sort of all of them from a particular site. Let's take all the lyrics we can find. 1960. Now it's updated, of course, but this is just the old picture up to 2010. And you see it's going down, right? So all right. So some people think that makes sense. But you have to say, all right, that's an interesting result. So the first thing you might do, well, a couple of things. One is, we were worried we only had 1,000 words. So this shows you what happens if you only take 750 of those words and apply it to this measure. And then do that randomly. And this shows that there's some robustness to this, right? So there's nothing particularly special about the 250 words you're leaving out. We're still getting that downward trend. And the thing that we'll add later on is we moved to 10,000 words. We ran a survey on Mechanical Turk. And then we used a much more sophisticated translation service to get 10 languages in total. So, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit. All right, so this is some evidence that there's some robustness. It doesn't just go all over the place. These are song titles, actually. In fact, it's titles. So this is broken down by genre. So you see gospel and soul holding up the top. So this is neutral here in terms of happiness. This is below, heading towards very sad down here. Metal and industrial is in kind of the right spot, and so pop and rock are there. So this is one of our first things. This just kind of came out for free. It laid it out. It showed there was a stability to the genres that one might anticipate. So it's not just a new musical genre in terms of sound. There's sort of an emotional niche that was accessed by the metal. All right, so this is just a little bit of sort of proof in the pudding. Okay, so this is what we call a word shift. This is one of our first ones, and I'll show they become more sophisticated. This is to show, so let's say after 1980 to before 1980, let's compare those lyrics and see, can we sort of see if this measure is showing you something reasonable about why it seems to be more negative. And so this is everything put together in terms of, well, so what you simply do is say, okay, words are changing in frequency. And so that can then affect your measure in 4 ways, right? So a happy word's being used more in the comparison text, means the happiness score goes up. A happy word that's being less will do the opposite. A negative word that's being used more will push the score down, and a negative word that's being used less will actually help it. Now these things are a little funny thing, but you have to really look at these eventually. So they're sophisticated word clouds in some way, or sort of word clouds where the points of things actually mean something. All right, so after 1980, these are why things are falling down. So there's more hate and pain and death and dead and sick and fear and hit and hell. So these words are appearing more often, and because of their scores, they're pushing things down. There's also less love and baby and home and music. Those things are positive words that are dropping. There's less lonely and less sad and less trouble and loneliness. So these things are pushing against that story, right? And there's more life in God. So these things make after the 1980s a little bit more positive, but the preponderance of movement is towards the negative, and it's because of these words, right? So these are the bad guys, so there's more of this, there's less of these good things, and then these two are pushing against it. All right, I'll show you more examples of those. And they get better as we go on. So 20,000 artists, this is the top 16 using this naive measure. And so it sorts them pretty well. So I had to look up S Club 7. I didn't know what that was. But so these are made up English bands where everyone's happy. Of course, Buddy Holly, the Beach Boys. I mean, these are generally speaking positive looking things. And the bottom should make sense. Yeah. And so this is our first attempt, and it seemed to be working reasonably well. Of course, some of these bands make people happy, so that's complicated. All right, so as I said, we mentioned this We Feel Fine site. So it's not just blogs entirely, it's sentences that start with I feel or some version of that, some different conjugation of that. And for some reason, people put their age on their blogs, so that was harvested by them. This is data that we were using from wefeelfine.org. And then we bin them, and you see, this is, again, one of our first results. You can see this rollover for happiness as a function of age. So this is middle school, 13 and 14-year-olds. And then this is getting, so 45 to 60, pretty solid. And of course, this is just from blogs, it's one thing, but it does seem to go against, this is one example of something that goes against survey responses, which tend to have an opposite shape. So we're doing something else. We're looking at what people talk about. So if you look at people who said they were 13 and 14 versus people who were born in 60 to 69, so they're in their 40s and 50s at the time of this, they're using these words more regularly, right? So it's more terrible and scared and dead and fat and upset and pain and mad and alone and lonely, bored and depressed. And you can see the words that are ambiguous and are problematic, like sick, for example. That can mean it's awesome, right? So yes, you can look at that and say, oh, that word is no good, but it's one of many. So you get to see if this thing is working in a reasonable way. And so the kids are using these some of these words these more positive words, that's helping them. But generally speaking, it's a bad story. Male versus female, this is from just this particular blog study. Very similar averages, which seems to match up with survey-based things. So the averages are very similar. The difference is, so this is female versus male voices, that there's more of a spectrum for female in terms of emotion. So if you look at the top 15 words, the only one that male use more is good, right? All of these other words are being used more by females, and so men put everything into the word good, which can be freighted incredibly with emotion. All right. Okay, so that's just a first start, and we knew we had kind of a rough thing, but it was getting out some interesting signals. So we wanted to improve it, and as I said before, we went to Mechanical Turk, and we took something quite different. So that first 1,000 words was put together by experts in a sense, right? So it was academics and suffering graduate students curated a list of 1,000 words, which included pancakes. And what we did instead was say, well, let's try and, so this is a bit like saying, these are my favorite animals, and then here's the forest with all the animals, and I'm going to only look at those guys. We went to real corpora and found the most commonly used words. A very simple thing to do, obviously. So took the 5,000 most commonly used words on Twitter, English Twitter for a particular time region. Google Books, there's a couple of 100 years here. Music lyrics, again, 50 years. New York Times, 20 years of the New York Times. So you take the 5,000 most, that's what we did. We took the 5,000 most commonly used words, merged them together, and that gave us something just over 10,000, right? So now we have 10,000 words. There isn't one single corpus for any language, of course, so that's why we merged these rather different looking ones. But now we're creating an instrument that will fit in, at least these guys pretty well, right? We have assessments for those words. So we put this onto Mechanical Turk. Scott McCloud, I don't know if anyone knows Scott McCloud and his 3 books on cartoon and comic building. Anyway, famous things. They're his pictures. So we'll come back to those later on. So we asked people how they felt about these. So we have 50 evaluations per word. You get the standard deviation as well, which is an interesting piece. All right, so this is just what pops out. So again, we're using people in Mechanical Turk, which is really people based in the US and India. So it's a mixture. The valence again means happiness, and 9 being the maximum. So these words should be, reasonable. We've got lots of laugh and rainbow pops up and all these sorts of things. There's a sort of a possibility of a Tolstoy. So Anna Karenina, the opening line is right. There are happy families are all the same, and it's an often used line, and sad families are all different in their own special way. So there's sort of, maybe that's here, these things are all kind of the same, and down the bottom they're more diverse. We've tried to look at that, but these are bad things, right? Bad things. These bad words ended up at the bottom. This is the bottom of our 10,000 list. So another way to view this is which ones have the highest standard deviation, right? So these are the words that people don't agree on. So people, if you look through these standard deviations, they agree on these. Some people are giving murderous, they're not giving it the most sad, but mostly, it's down there. The ones with high standard deviation, in order of standard deviation, it's an interesting list of words. So there's swearing. This is, we get the swear words, of course, from Twitter. We don't get it from the New York Times. We don't get it from Google Books, and this is why it was so important to reach out in our language acquisition. So ha 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 is a very important word. It's not going to appear with any frequency in the Google Books corpus. All right, so vices, cigarettes are up there. Let's see, beer, so there's alcohol. Zombies, for some reason, people are divided about zombies. There are ways to run large groups of people, so Islam, Christ. McDonald's they're not happy about that. Capitalist is here. I think socialist is on the next one. I'm not sure what happened to summer, but it's there. And what we'll do is, there are different ways to approach it. So you might want to discard these, right? Because these are things that people don't really settle on. So that's a reasonable thing to do. And it turns out one way to do that is to say, well, let's just discard words that are between 4. This is a very rough way to do it. Discard words that are between 4 and 6. So 5 again being neutral, 1 being very sad, 9 being very positive. We'll discard the words that are kind of in the middle. So there are two aspects to them. One is they're just simply boring, like the and of. I haven't showed you, but the gets it's 4.99. Right, so we rated the, which is insane, but we did it because it's the most commonly used word. So we can throw it out now that we're satisfied it's a neutral word. And we'll throw out some of these others in the same way, in that they end up with averages that are kind of in the middle, but they have a big spread. Right, so there are different classes of words there. All right, so let's look at Twitter. Like some of us in this room, we've been collecting tweets for a long time. We wrote to them when there were only 4 people in the company. It looked like an interesting thing, and they gave us a feed, which they accidentally have let us keep up with. So we get about 10% of all tweets, and now we're getting all geotagged tweets in another box. And so we've done some fun things with them, but it is a bit of a large data set, bit of a mess, and it's not the only thing we think about, of course. Okay, so this is some quotidian behavior, right? So this is just to see that early on, at least, Twitter was producing things about what's happening now. So these are mentions of lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner throughout the day, averaged over many days. So that's good. This is hungry, starving, food, eat, and unfortunately for chicken. They've been renormalized, so that they match up at least in terms of the frequency of usage. And okay, many of you know, you guys know all about this data. This is a particular tweet from a while back. It's a government shutdown, and it was about reopening the World War II memorial. And this is what's in a tweet, right? And that comes from Twitter. This is a typical kind of thing, especially if you ever retweet, the tweet is inside the thing that you've retweeted. Early on, that wasn't true. They've made things a bit easier, but there's a lot of data inside a tweet. All right, so we did a bunch of things. There's something wrong with that link at the top. I'll give you a few small pieces, and then I'll show you this hedonometer business that we have. So one simple thing is, well, let's look at people who are communicating back and forth on Twitter and see how they're correlated in terms of happiness using this measure. Right. So this is an early piece. And so we can see the number of links out here. So this is a very difficult problem because of networks and subsampling. It's a horrible business that most people ignore. And we tried to do our best with this, but the correlation drops off. This seems to be connected to the Fowler and Christakis work, but that's very fraught with the Framingham Heart Study. Data set being as it is. All right, that's one thing. This is what I call the daily unraveling of the human mind. So this is looking at the happiness of tweets. This is we're measuring over a wide range of time. Let's see, it's 2009, 2010. So this is wake up time. We're going to get some coffee. Things are good if you're tweeting at this point, and then it deteriorates throughout the day and picks up through the night. Obviously, it's an interesting, complicated sort of who's awake at which point. In some ways, biological midnight is around 4 or 5 a.m. It's when some people are up too late and some people are getting up early. This is just through the week, and I'll show you this again. Probably Saturday and Sunday seem to be the peak in terms of happiness. Tuesday is the nadir. And to go with this, so another piece here, this is the average. The variance also increases at the same time, right? So we become more emotional throughout the day, at least, this is in tweets. The emotional content increases, or the variance becomes wider, but we lose the plot a little bit and we need to be rebooted like a Windows machine. So that's just a feature of humans. And this is 5 words, these are 5 words you can't say on television. I guess you probably can't, but 5 you can say on cable, I guess. All right, so these are 5 words you can't say on television. And these are the very different curse words, right? And they have a very similar frequency of usage. It goes up through the day as the wheels come off. All right. So we've done a whole bunch of other things. This is very hard to see, but we did a simple search thing, and we'd love to be able to do this in a big, rich way. It's hard to do. So the 100 terms we put in, where we looked at. So here's Stephen Colbert, for example. So we put in we searched for Stephen Colbert and looked for all the words in tweets that Stephen Colbert appeared in, and measured the happiness of all those ambient words. Right. So this is over a particular time frame, and then we ranked them according to the words around them. So this is an important thing. So happy was happy, it has all these good words usually associated with it, and it pops it to the top. Iraq, flu, unfortunately Mosque is here, Afghanistan, headache, drugs, gun, BP, because it's around the time of the oil spill, Senate, depressed, Goldman Sachs, George Bush, Glenn Beck is here, Pope. All right, so these ones have words around them that are more negative. The smileys, right, so emoticons, little smiley face, the more complicated smiley face, and then the frowny face. They're associated with bad things. So this was not a bad thing to do, and of course you could do this as time series and all sorts of business. Just have words here, but essentially the rating of an individual word done on this mechanical Turk's process correlates with the average score of the words around them in this case tweets or sentences. So that's, context we're not really doing very well, of course, or we're throwing it away, but this is not a bad thing to see. It's a good thing to see. All right, so we built this thing, hedonometer.org. We've added a whole bunch of things over the summer. This is the initial version of it. The colored points represent, the colored discs represent days of the week. So this is a Thursday, for example, and then this is a Friday. You can see the legend. But what these really are, of course, is this is Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. Valentine's is in there. So fair enough. All these things are popping up because people are disproportionately talking about them. People often say, well, Christmas Day is awful, or I hate Thanksgiving, and you do see that. So you'll see the negative aspects popping out on the other side. But generally, people are very positive on these annual holidays, right? These annual events, they're predictable. We know they're coming. People tend to say good things. And all the bad stuff appears unexpectedly. And I'll show you another example. So we've got this richer piece now. So for instance, this is the H1N1 back here. This is the death of Michael Jackson, earthquake in Chile. This is tsunami in Japan. So the death of Osama bin Laden is complicated because it's a negative thing that happened to a negative character. So at least for one number that we put out, it turns out to be very negative. But if you look at the texture of the words, you can see what's going on. Again, earthquakes is the bombing at the Boston Marathon, not guilty verdict for George Zimmerman, and that's the death of Robin Williams. So all of these unexpected events drive and this, of course, this is all of Twitter in English. This is the whole thing. And it's really just a demonstration piece. And then all of these other pieces are set-up days. Independence Day, for example, Valentine's Day. The only one, I guess, that wasn't is the wedding, the royal wedding. But everyone knew that was coming. All right. So you can zoom in on this thing. You can start to see it will pop up or show you more things. So here's the bombing at the Boston Marathon. Here's the arrest of the second suspect. There's the death of Corey Monteith pops up. Germany beating Brazil. Ended up to sort of dip the whole thing down. Just saying how terrible it was, basically. And there's a protest in Ferguson caused a whole bump here. Now, you can zoom in, of course, geographically and start to look at things like that. This is one example, and I could play with this online, but maybe that's going to be dangerous. This is the Malaysia Air Flight crashing in Ukraine. You can see this is one of our word shifts. You can click on all these things and it will just show you these guys, and you can play around. This is all very interactive. You can click on the event and find the Wikipedia event and so on. All right, so it has, it's a prototype and it keeps improving. This one is for Robin Williams. So there's RIP, sad, suicide, dead, depression. So, people are talking about it. And then there are going to be these other words that are going the other way about comedy and laughter and peace and so on. All right, that's the protest in Ferguson. Okay, geography. All right, so let's talk about that. Let me just show you a little bit of this. We're here. You're forced to listen to me. Right, so you can zoom in on this thing. It has some nice features. More words appear as you pop in. You can play around with it. You can see, so let's see, arrest of so it's Twitter, right? So the arrest of Justin Bieber appears. You feel bad about everything there. This is a terrible event, so shooting at Sandy Hook. Of course, there are words that are positive on that day. Kids and families and children, and they're unfortunately, next to shooting and gun and killed and all these kinds of words. So you can play around with this thing. It's got all sorts of good, fun things where you can look at bad events. Here's the Boston Marathon. Very strongly negative. And the one word that appears on the other side is prayers. Right? And we'll see that later on when we look at phrases a little bit, which is new work that we're getting to. But it's really Boston bombing, thoughts and prayers, send donations is kind of the small narrative of that. Okay, so that's one bit. I'm about to show you this. You can play around with this and look at how things are going. So let's look at Massachusetts, 33 out of 51. This is for the last 30 days. And you can go over and see what's going on, if you don't like these words. Why is it going bad? Wicked gets mentioned. And wicked was interpreted as a bad word. So obviously you want to discard that. And so it's easy to take out a word that's wrong, right? If you want to, we can just switch. We say, you can add it to a little stop word list. If you say this really isn't working, you can just switch it off. All right, so lots of things. Then we have, of course, a ranking. Maryland and is actually not doing well. Louisiana, Mississippi, typically at the bottom of a lot of things. The Vermont seems to think it's all very happy, so there you go. Vermont has a bit of a closed emotional spectrum, though, I will tell you that. Yeah. Which kind of probably makes sense. All right. So this was just blog post worthy. We looked at Manhattan, right? So that's a fun thing to play around with. And it was near the Hayden Planetarium that popped up. Wall Street Journal wrote a piece about it. They got excited. So that was a little bit of fun. Someone made an advertising campaign out of this, which was insane. And they put it in Times Square because they interpret us as saying Times Square was the happiest place. Really nutty things. And actually does say, a study done at the University of Vermont. It's ridiculous. All right. You cannot control the press. All right, we didn't win a trip to Jamaica. Okay, so I hope someone did. All right, so we have, so this was the paper associated with this. It's a paper that has its own little Twitter feed. It tweets about which cities are happy and so on. We have online appendices, which have all sorts of interesting things. I'm going to show you a little bit of press that came out of this, because this is a comparative study. Of course, we're comparing states, but then also cities. I don't know why we chose red and blue. That seems like a fraught choice of colors. I'm going to play these things, and I hope they will show up. Let me show you first. So here's a test of our measure against some other standard measures that are based on all sorts of inputs. So there's our happiness measure is compared to a bunch of measures across the top. And in each plot you have, 50 states plus DC. You have the score for whatever measure it is. So this is gun violence in this column. This is a health index. This is a peace index. This is Gallup well-being, where people are interviewed. And this is this BRFS thing, which is a bit of a funny thing. Behavioral risk factor surveillance system. Yes, that's it. Survey, which is takes a lot of pieces in. So you can see, so blue, the more blue it is, the lower the p-value, and you can kind of visually see whether it's correlating or not. Ours does do very well with, generally all of them except for this BRFS business, which, that is a bit of a funny measure. But there was a paper in Science a few years ago that had Louisiana #1 in terms of happiness. And so the lieutenant governor of Louisiana hates our study but likes that one. I don't, does it come from the CDC? I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't, okay, we can talk about that. We'll get that sorted out. So it's matching up somewhat. I mean, this is a hard thing to do. Of course, ours is this funny thing that's coming out of Twitter, which, you know, obviously a messy business. All right, we ordered cities because we could. So Napa comes out on top. Obviously, it's a nice place to be, and there are tourists tweeting and all sorts of things. You can start to sort out tourists if you want. Lots of places over here. The bad end of the list, of course, is where people want to go and look at it. So Beaumont, Texas turned out to be the bottom, and they unfortunately got a fair amount of press. We didn't really mean for that to happen. Flint, Michigan, famously a place on hard times. And okay, you can see what's going on. I mean, this is one of these word shifts. There's a lot more swearing and arrest and don't. And there are also words like no and don't, just little negative pieces in there. Boo is in there, hurt. You know, these are the words that are pushing Beaumont down relative to everywhere else. Of course, they're saying wine and restaurant and happy in Napa, and there's a lot less swearing. I know this is hard to see, but you can see there's a lot less swearing. And so these, yeah, okay, that's good. So let me see if, okay. I don't know if you can see this or hear this.
You know this, John? Did you know about this? Hashtag happy.
Okay, so our main achievement was to get Al Roker to say hashtag happy. That was that. There was a whole piece on it. This is Rhode Island.
Welcome back to the Road Show. This morning in the buzz, do you think Rhode Island's happy? Look at the smile we have on our face. Not compared to Hawaii. Hawaii was found out to be the #1 happiest state in the country. I know we're shocked by that, right? We're shocked by that.
You're right near the water.
Absolutely.
It's beautiful.
That's
pineapple everywhere.
That's according to a new research done by the University of Vermont, who sifted through a bunch of Twitter accounts and Twitter itself to get all this research. And when we say they did research, they have charts, they have graphs.
Pages.
It was very, very technical as far as how to how many people were across the country.
Definitely technical for Twitter, for that matter, as well. Rhode Island, of course, falling in at number 35.
So, yeah. Then they go out and they interview people like, is it happy or not? Okay, we had a whole bunch of, there were a lot of these. And I wanted to show you one more. Okay, this is Ellen.
You know, apparently Twitter just did a study to find the happiest city in the country. Did you hear about this? They looked at over 10 million tweets and recorded which areas used the happiest words. And then they determined that the happiest city is Napa, California. Have you been there? It's beautiful.
Twitter did it. Yeah.
I would like to live there someday. It's beautiful. It's wine country, and it's always 72 degrees, plenty of land. So I sent my reporter Amy there to ask people what makes them so happy.
Hi, Helen. I'm reporting from beautiful.
You're reporting from where?
Napa.
How much have you had to drink?
No, I haven't seen Lincoln, but listen.
So, yeah, it keeps going. All right, so, you know, there's an achievement. We got people to say funny things. But it was comparative, and people like to compare, and they like to talk about being compared. So this was a comment we received on our blog from the user Redneck, which presumably isn't pronounced correct. So I've lived in quite a few places, the most recent Beaumont, Texas. It's a pure hellhole, hot, humid, trashy, terrible schools, corrupt government, lots of crime, no public parks or activities. I know this is terrible, I feel like it, but it's just a terrible culture, other than crawfish. Completely lacks diversity. This study confirms my suspicions that cities don't get any more miserable than this. Obviously anecdotal, but kind of funny. And then we got one from, there were a number of posts like this, and then there was one a bit later on that seemed to come from the civic sort of agency there. It said, it is 1 hour from the coast. It is a lovely, you know, the list of, we have a baseball, yeah. And this is the Beaumont Enterprise published this. This is the entire article. Eggheads find Beaumont is the saddest city. That's what some eggheads at UVM have determined. Their method, Twitter, they said they did something. All right, so that's all right. That's good. All right, so we did some other stuff with, looking at people moving around. This is, all right, that's just tweets. This connects, some of you will know of Marta Gonzalez's work with cell phone data, looking at how people move around. So this is just simply looking at geotags of people's tweets, and then taking their movement patterns, stretching them, and then orienting them in the right way, and then sort of plotting everything on top. And you get this kind of overall movement pattern. So this is kind of home, and this is work, and then there's sort of a zip distribution for places that people end up. So this matches pretty well, the cell phone data, which is of course a very different kind of source, different kinds of resolution. We grow fonder as we wander, so this is, depending on how far people are away from this is in kilometers, so 1,000 kilometers away, people are tweeting good things, so they're traveling and doing all sorts of things. You can look at, I won't show you the word shifts, but you can look at what's going on. And then this is people who travel further in general. They have a larger radius of gyration. They tend to be express happier things on their tweets. So geotag tweets, I mean, so Twitter, of course, is full of bots and corporations and those things, and you have to deal with them. But also weather stations tweet now, and sort of ambulances, and you get all sorts of extra goodness in there. So if crash and burns keeps appearing in your word shifts, I mean, that's one of the things with the word shifts. They're very simple-minded things, but they immediately tell you that something may be up if you keep seeing humidity being mentioned and pressure rising and falling. Probably a lot of tweets like that. All right, so I showed you some of the, so the website we've upgraded, it's interactive. I don't need to push you on that one. I've showed you these things. We have things like Sankey diagrams. I'm saying that because I know the word now. Where is it? Yeah, so you can do these kind of comparative things, like from one period of time to another. How did the ranking change? All sorts of good stuff. Okay, so let's move on to something that's not Twitter, because that's not what we're completely interested in. Books. Okay, so this is a New Yorker cartoon. Moby Dick reading Moby Dick, which Colbert said is a metaphor, I think, for the struggle of reading Moby Dick. Okay. All right, it wasn't that terrible, so let's look at it. So these are a couple of different time series. So what we do is we simply sort of slide a window through a book. Horrible thing to do. Slide a window through a book, take all the words, measure the happiness for it, and then just keep sliding through. And these are different window sizes, but this is kind of a general trend, right? It ends badly, or the whale wins. From the whale's point of view, it's like this, and you can do all your word shifts and so on. This is too complicated. Let me just show you these. This is, so Moby Dick is up the top. This is Crime and Punishment, but in Russian. So now we're using the original text, and we're using Russian evaluation of Russian words by Russian to get this story, right? So the start is, I'm going to murder this woman and this terrible person and get all this money and save the world, and then we start to feel bad about it, and there's all sorts of, you can dig into the patterns of things here. Then there's Count of Monte Cristo, ends well, we get to escape. So we got a bit carried away with that, and we've built this online site. So here's Frankenstein, we show that it ends badly. Miserable, enemy, despair, death, dead, rage, die. So that's what's happening here versus here. And this is Harry Potter. This is all 7 books stuck together. This is the start of the Goblet of Fire business. Everyone's happy or excited about, you can look at the words here, they're all excited about this competition. This is Dumbledore's death, and this is Sirius Black's death. Cedric Diggory, not so, bad, but not so bad. So you can really, is that it? I think, yeah. Okay, you can play around with this. So here's the Prisoner of Azkaban. So you have all these sorts of things. You can find the reference text that will adjust, and right. So if we want to see why this piece of text is much less than this one, you can play around with the whole visualization business here. Okay, all right, you get the idea. Count of Monte Cristo, here it is in French. You can translate it into English, and you see less prison and death and prisoner. Okay, you know it ends well. That's pretty good, I think. Yeah. Okay, good. Good. So there are 10,000 books. You can just randomly go through them. Do all sorts of things with that. All right, so, okay, so just a few other things. This is now, again, moving away from happiness. We're just going to, a few things about health. So this is looking across cities, about 380 cities, putting a little shape file around them. These are, and you can see it's pretty scattered. This is obesity rate for those regions versus mention of the word McDonald's. So, it's a low correlation, but it's there. So we're just playing around a little bit. This is mentions of the word brunch. So there's just a couple of things to, for people who tweet about brunch, they're not actually eating food. These are correlations again with individual words, with obesity. They're mostly anti-correlated. So cafe, sushi, for some reason alcohol seems to be anti-correlated a little bit. This is, we're just playing around here, espresso, bean, bakery, coffee. It's obviously a very strong socioeconomic signal that's coming through in the tweets.
So is this the ranking out of entire all words?
Yeah. So there's prevalence of the words, simply prevalence of words, yeah, right. And so we have these 380 regions, count how many times the word cafe, or normalize it properly in that region, and then compare it to these other pieces. So these words are correlating positively: heartburn, eat, McDonald's, ham, wings, and hungry seem to correlate with obesity rates. So this was just a little bit of playing around to start with. And then we're producing these kinds of maps. So now we have a list of about 1,000 to 2,000 words that are food related or phrases, and about 10,000 that are exercise related. So this is a bit of a mad idea. So people are mentioning whatever it is, hamburger and so on. We turn that into calories. So if you say hamburger, we'll say it's 100 grams of hamburger and it means this many calories. And if you say skiing, we'll turn that into calories. And so it turns out that the flux, if you like, or the balance of the exercise minus the food-based ones, sort of input and output, correlates very strongly with obesity rates. Right. So Utah, Colorado, actually Vermont as well, they're all doing well in terms of this business. We don't need to look at that. Other things, the insomniometer, these things that we're just playing around with. So this is simply mentions of the word sleepy. Tired doesn't work well because it's used metaphorically too much. This correlates well with the CDC's sleep insufficiency measure. So it seems to be down the south. Binge drinking, so if you look for the word hangover, doesn't work because of the movie, but if you look for hungover, and you look at the tweets, and generally people, for whatever reason, are telling you that they're hungover, and their parents probably, if their parents would know what they're doing. Vermont seems to be happy to get happy. All right, so, but this again correlates even more strongly with the binge drinking estimates, again based on a very different kind of input. So we may have a sleep, snoozometer and so on. Of course, sleep, fantastically important, right? I mean, an incredibly important thing. I mean, people, die in car crashes because they haven't enough sleep. There's all sorts of things associated with that. So that's something it'd be great if we can really get that to work. Okay, so I want to then just show you something about words. We'll move away from all these pieces. Okay, I don't need to say all these things. If you just simply take these 10,000 words and plot them, right, so we're not using their frequency anymore, we're just going to say, all right, we're looking at the dictionary we have in front of us. We have this dictionary of 10,000 words, and we have their scores. So let's just bin them. And so you see there's this, so neutral again is 5. You see there's a bias towards the positive. So I'm going to say language is a social, is a sort of one of our great social tools, right? It really is. I mean, arguably the greatest. Money's a pretty good one too. And that there's has been framed as a Pollyanna hypothesis. It's just sitting there in language, which is a very interesting possibility. All right. We have to look at frequency of words, so that's what I'm going to try to do here. I call them jellyfish plots. So there's the distribution for English. This is in Twitter. So you see there's a preponderance of words that are above neutral. And then what this is this little plot here is showing you, here's a happiness score for each word, and here's their rank, right? So we take the rank of a word and plot its happiness score. So we get these dots. And then if you run a little filter down here and then measure the deciles and then smoothly plot all the deciles, you can see that the distribution that we have overall is similar to the distribution you get for different slices here, right? So words that are between 4,000 and 5,000 in rank have a similar distribution to the ones that are between 1 and 1,000. So rare words and common words have they have this positivity bias in them. It's not just, these tendrils could go in all sorts of directions, or it might be the rare words are more negative and so on. But it seems to be pretty stable. So New York Times is here, music, lyrics, books. They each have their own kind of individual structure. This is a more elaborate one with some of the words shown here, right? So these are bad, but less commonly used words in the New York Times. So death and funeral, of course, because of obituaries. Mother, grandmother, love, extraordinary. These are positive words that are used a lot. So you can see, again, this spread. All right, wow. Can I show this? This is what I was trying to explain before. We can chop out this piece in the middle of words. So we throw them away, and then we use these words to evaluate a text. And what this is showing is a time series for Twitter. So we've seen a bunch of these. A time series for Twitter as a function of the window size. So we throw out more and more words, right? And we get just these really extreme ones, and we can still measure things. And what you see as you do that, so here's where we're using all of our words. Now we're starting to throw some out from this middle band. You see it starts to become more, so it's like turning the gain up on something. You start to see more and more resolution, right? Starting to jump more and more and more because you've thrown out these neutral words. So that's useful. Eventually it kind of goes on the fritz. You don't have enough words to evaluate it. But the important thing is that these guys all have a very similar they correlate very well. These time series all correlate very well. So you do have this way of turning up the gain. You still see the same basic picture, but it can be a way of discerning two texts in a more nuanced way. That's definitely a detail. All right, other languages. Let me just jump through these last pieces. We're nearly finished. So we've got English now, Spanish, Brazilian Portuguese. It's really Spanish evaluated by Mexican participants. French, German, Russian, Indonesian, Arabic, Korean, and Chinese. And we've used 24 corpora to create these 10 corpora. So some of them have 4 corpora behind them, some of them have 1. Kind of a diverse set of things. There's the New York Times, for example, there's news, but we have Google Books. Twitter is a good source. Things like movie and TV subtitles. So various other pieces have gone in to create these corpora. Okay, so here are some examples. They all have this same story, that rare words and common words have this positive bias. Some of you will be able to understand these things. So Hitler gets, Hitler's rated negatively. For example, this is Arabic, has that same kind of spread. Chinese, similar kind of thing, but it's a tied out, there's less variance here, and it's just for Google Books. This is Brazilian Portuguese, which is a fun one to look at because I had to look this up. So this is ha 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 ha, right? That's it's easier to type. So a ridiculous thing you can do is look at the different languages. So there's the JA, 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 right? So most languages we've looked at have a repeatable laughter one, which is 2 letters, which you can make mistakes in, right? So you can look at this sort of distribution of length sizes. You get a power law size distribution. This is ridiculous for these laughter things, but these have a different distribution because you just have to hold the K down. All right. Okay, so they really get into that. So that's, on Twitter, this is really a feature of Brazilian Portuguese. So Korean Twitter, I think, is the only place where we found so there's a ha ha ha. This is a wah wah wah, and it's little pies, right? So it looks like anime crying. So that was well done. So we can make a really sad one by just repeating the same symbol. All right, let's put them all on a stack. So this is in order of the median of these distributions of happiness for these words. So it turns out Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese kind of float to the top. Things happen like it's Spanish evaluated by Mexican speakers. So of course Mexico was very high in that list. Chinese end up being down at the bottom, but this is in terms of the median. And then the others are scattered in different ways. But the overall story is that there's more yellow than gray, right? That they all have a positive bias, which I don't know what you might have thought before you came to this, but that generally seems to be somewhat surprising. This is in order of variance. So again, it's the Portuguese and Spanish, Brazilian Portuguese and Spanish are sort of to the top, but English seems to float up as well, having a wider variance. And Russian, at least in the Google Books corpus, seems to be the most closed in. All right. Throw you a few more things here. So we have started to look at this, and this is hard. It's Mechanical Turk. They can do bad things if you don't do the right thing. So we got 2,000 words through before they did something to our survey that didn't work out. Someone built a script to mess with it. All right, so so we're going to ask people how they feel, again with words. There's anger, disgust, so now we're going to have 6 emotions. Instead of just the happy, sad spectrum, we're going to have happiness and sadness. Anger, disgust, fear, and what's my other one? Surprise. All right, so these are words that have the most anger. So the person feels the most anger. These words, no one is angry about piano. Disgust is here, and piano again is not a disgusting entity. So fear, no one fears a banana. Well, babies might fear baths, so they're not on this. Beans and Johnson are the least surprising things, and these things are also. So there's a lot of overlap with what's what the fear and disgust, anger and sadness. They have a lot of overlap, as I'll show you. But surprises here, lottery. These are also, that makes sense. So we can start to a completely different thing. Now we'll make these little pictures that represent the emotional texture of a word. So anger, disgust, sadness, fear, surprise, and happiness. So at least we put these guys on a thing. And the negative ones are in these four. And generally what you see is the negative ones are generally correlated so far. Surprise is off on its own axis a little bit, and happiness is there. So here are some measurement parameters, right? So the gr, the oo, the y, the eek, the wow, and the ha. Units of measurement. And Scott McLeod, I mentioned him before. So the thing about these emotions is that they seem to be built into our facial expressions, right? So, and there's a spectrum for all of them. So sadness is here. It can go from to utter despair, and then you sort of have combinations of them, right? So terror is a mixture of things. For example, you can combine these guys. So shock could be surprise and some other pieces. All right, so a few more examples. So laughter does the right thing, a little bit of surprise. Tortured maxes out the negative pieces, but also gets surprise. War is very similar to tortured. Rutting goes more on the disgust and the surprise axis. Veterans gets sort of a compassionate response, which is a bit of sadness and a bit of happiness. So that's something we couldn't measure before if we just had this, of course, just one number. So we're getting these, we're separating sadness and happiness. So lottery gives you some prize and happiness. So this is something that I hope that I can finish soon. All right. Just want to say we're working on phrases as well. We have this paper that's in review now. Zipf's law works for phrases actually rather than words. And it's a way of churning out phrases. And I'll just jump through these things. We're trying to build this story finder, story breaker thing that extracts phrases around events. And you can't see this, but again, it's the Boston bombings, and you get this quick narrative out of Boston bombings, tells you what's happening, and then you get thoughts and prayers floats to the top as a phrase, and then send donations. So that's it. I was going to say just a few last pieces. So we're going to add more meters if we can really, benchmark them against some ground truth. We're going to add some more pieces like music lyrics. As I showed you, that was a very poor version of it that we initially did. Things that people can play around with. Twitter is a good input stream, but it'd be great to have more. And the phrase-based piece is coming, so that will be a real achievement if we can get that to work. It'd be great to be able to get stories and narratives out of these large texts. What are the frames around a particular topic? So you have Snowden appear, for example. What are the frames around Snowden, right? So there's sort of the traitor frame and the hero frame, and how do these things change? Like Lance Armstrong is another good example. It has sort of the kill the monster type story going for him, like Beowulf, sort of cancer, and then all these events. But it also has betrayal floating along, and then that becomes the dominant piece. So could you get that out? And I know people have worked on this in all sorts of ways, but that might be fun. All right, so yeah, lots of other things. There's press and papers you can look at or ignore or whatever you like, but that's where we are. Okay, thank you.
Do you have any questions for Peter?
Okay, yeah.
Did you do anything with hashtags on Twitter, or were you just taking the text out of it?
Yeah, so the initial 5,000 words we took was from a period of time, and we just took everything. So there are some hashtags in there. Hashtag Justin Bieber. But so they have to dissolve. But we didn't really specifically. So that's a thing you could upgrade. I don't know. You could do all sorts of things. Take off the hashtag. One thing we didn't really do was stemming. So in a way, we actually let that just happen. So if people use the past tense of a word, all right, they use it. Now we're going to evaluate it. And sometimes you see they're different. It's not quite as simple as you might think. Yes?
I saw some of the
Some of the, yeah, some of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for example, Arabic. So I couldn't just see
Yeah.
all the words, of course, but I noticed that maybe most of them are like in standard Arabic, so there are no dialects. So
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
wondering where they come from. I mean, are they translations of movies, or like where do this?
Yeah, so that one, let me think. So there are a lot of different sources. So we have Twitter. I think for Arabic we have two corpora at this point. One is Twitter, so it's just frequently used Arabic words on Twitter. And yeah, there's subtitles, you know, so you have, it's been translated into Arabic, so it's a subtitles, yeah. So that's a funny, you know, that's a weird corpus.
My question is that these subtitles are based on translations. Do they really reflect how
Oh.
happy that language is?
Yeah, so I don't have this picture up here, but I mean, I could show it to you, but we have a matrix essentially showing you, so you can take the, okay, what we can do is a bit of a silly thing to do, but you know, there are a lot of words, so we can't do it one by one, and we're not very good at all these languages. So we just took our big 10,000 words from each language, put it into Google Translate from each pair of languages, so we have 10 choose 2 languages, translate across, and then stick it back in and translate it back, and see which ones are translationally stable, if you like, right? So which words come back to themselves. And usually that's between 3,000 to 5,000 words, roughly. And if you just take those words, so now we have, at least according to Google Translate, translationally, we can translate between them, and then you plot the happiness scores for them in each language. They correlate very well. So they correlate very well. So that's not bad. I mean, obviously, it's a very rough thing. You know, context is a real problem. Some words like lying, for example, in English is thought, the first meaning you have for that is that it's bad, whereas if you translate that into Spanish, it means lying down, I think, as I recall. And that's perceived to be a good thing. So they're really off axis. You see some points are off axis where the meaning changes, the dominant meaning changes enough. But yeah, so yeah. Right, yeah, sure.
How did you deal with negation?
Yeah, so you can look at things like not happy and so on and see how much they appear. They appear with pretty low abundance, that this silly method that we've tried to start with works okay. But when you go to phrases, which is a hard thing to do, but once we get to that will clean that up. The word shifts actually work nicely in that way because you'll see not appearing, so it can actually help there. But yeah, that's a hard thing to do well, but it's the next piece. However, the abundance of them is pretty low, so it's all right. It's not. I mean, it does. The scores make sense.
One last thing. Do you have any place for neutral?
For neutral words?
Yeah.
Truly neutral words? Yeah. We haven't used them in the measure, but I don't think that's they could certainly be used in some other kind of application. So we have this list of words with scores associated with them. Do whatever you want with them. For the purposes of making this thing so far, we've kind of taken them out. It's useful to know they're neutral. So in effect, what we've been doing is crowdsourcing stop words, which again is something that people might curate. So I don't want to have any prepositions in my list of words. I'll just take them out. I'll just block those. So this has been a kind of a systematic way of creating a list of stop words that you take out of your corpus.
Thank you.
Sure.
How many people do you ask first for each word?
Yeah, so there are 50 evaluations per word. We used Mechanical Turk to start with for the English one, and then we moved to a translation service. This is actually quite a lot of money, and they have quite a sophisticated test to see if you're a speaker, a quality speaker, and you have to be based in that country. So it's spread over 50 people.
So have you considered coming up with these happiness scores with measures other than people reporting them to you?
Yeah, I mean, without any human evaluation?
Right.
I think the only,
If you had to measure an angry score, you'll have to go spend all this money.
Yeah. Okay, so I think, perhaps this is the most in line with what you're asking. given a kernel of words that we have, you can then go and start to infer something about other words. So we haven't done that because we've tried to just keep it, not that this is a clean operation, we've tried to keep it, there's so much you can do that we've tried to keep it at this list, but you could certainly then go and infer something about phrases, for example, and some of our students have worked on saying, okay, this phrase is a positive phrase because of what we know about the words around it and in it and so on, and it appears with a certain abundance we can do it. So yeah, there are ways of then sort of bootstrapping out, I think. Is that? Yeah. You have to start with something though.
Right.
Yeah.
So you both struggle with concepts like sarcasm once.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So, and we're trying to measure the overall texture of something, individual sentences very, very hard, but it feels like, we've compared it, of course, to other kinds of measures and so on, and when you look at the books, I think you could, in a common sense kind of way, you can say, oh yeah, that is a bad part of it, but you won't be able to, maybe, some of you guys can do that, get irony out and so on. It's hard to do it really well at the level of a sentence, especially when you don't have someone sitting there adding facial expressions and, all sorts of other stuff. And that makes it much easier for us. But plain text with, if they put comma not at the end, that helps. But no.
So there's literature on sentiment analysis.
Yes, of course.
And I wonder how you see this connecting to that. And maybe a lot of what you're getting at here, the sentiment of individual words, and if you could somehow get at the sentiment of an entire sentence altogether, what would you do with that?
Oh, if you could get it evaluated?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're moving to phrases, and I think, so there's a piece of work we've done here that what we've been trying to get to is, okay, so the typical sort of zip distribution is you take words by frequency and then you order them. But we want something that's in between that where you say, okay, let's have a mixture of words and phrases.
Right. Yeah, I'm not imagining that you gather a big table that would have all possible sentences, each one of which would be rated.
Yeah, so it's not going to be all possible sentences.
Combined evidence from within sentences.
Yeah, that's right. So it's not going to be all possible, but it will be commonly used phrases. And if we can have a sort of a mixed thing, then we could probably do what we've done here, just carry on. Yeah. We have built directly out of the particular sentiment analysis and the literature on emotion from psychology, absolutely, yeah. That was the starting point.
The other question I wanted to ask was, this is about predicting emotion, and I wonder why emotion, or whether in the future you're interested in things that, let's see, what would be right outside of emotion?
Meaningfulness.
Oh, sure, we could have a great talk about that.
Well, I think what I want to get to is stories. What are the narratives of people? What are the emergent narratives of humans? I think there's sort of people have talked about this for a long time, that there's a finite list of stories, or there are these dominant kinds of motifs and so on, and that would be a lot of fun. And so that's not emotion anymore, necessarily. It's part of it. But, well, I think what happened was, we just sort of saw this as a possibility and then, kind of dug away and failed in a whole bunch of ways, and still failing in a lot of ways, but, opened up, and so we went forward and built this thing. Measuring. We have one with the hangover stuff is about trying to measure regret. Can you measure regret in social media? Why? Can you kind of get at why people might eat that burger again, or so, whatever it is, the one that gives them heartburn. Something. We were trying to think of things that are perhaps guaranteed to give you a regretful, So, there are certainly other possibilities. I don't know how far we can get with some of them. But for me, the big thing would be, taxonomy of human stories. Way back there.
Yeah, so at the beginning of your talk, you gave a quote from Alan Greenspan saying, oh, if we only had this tool to measure people's...
It was a little optimistic of him, yeah.
Oh, I see, okay. I was just curious to see if you tried...
Have we done it with the stock market?
Any sort of economic application to your...
We've done it a little bit, and there's been some work to show that economic misery indices seem to correlate with Google Books with a lag. Maybe that's there, although I'm not...
It seems like you have a good trailing indicator. So.
Yeah, that's right. Look, there are firms that have started up on Wall Street to do this, to feed tweets in and dollars come out, but I don't think any of them have been successful. And in some ways, it's my recalcitrant behavior. It's just that like we're trying to create something that is different to the money thing. So, but you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, yeah. Now, I will say that generally speaking, what happens is that it does seem, so for instance, the geography thing correlates very much with socioeconomic status. I mean, you see, as people sort of go up in socioeconomic status, they tend to use more, elevator is probably the wrong, but they talk about film and, other cafe and so on. They talk about these other things that their life is allowing them to have. And at the other end, you see smaller words, actually, more close family words than there's, yeah. So you can definitely see that maybe at that level. But in terms of making money, I'm not sure about making money.
So Peter, do you have a correlation coefficient with income per capita or family income?
Yeah, we do have that somewhere in one of these geography papers. There's because we have, what is it? We have 380 cities in that study, and there are about 500 demographics.
And so what?
And I can get it to you later on. What's that?
Is it as high as 0.7, 0.8?
I can't remember off the top of my head. But what we did in the end was, because it's so blatantly socioeconomic, actually, it's kind of rough, the thing that comes out. I mean, it's not a feel-good picture, but it makes sense. It's just not a fun thing to show. Yeah, I guess that figure's not in there. So we broke it into 7 socioeconomic categories. And you can see the sort of the top one and the bottom one really correlate strongly. Yeah.
The question about the books, do you think, looking at the sentiments of some of the bestsellers, you could predict whether a book
will do well or not? Yeah, I don't know. So we only just put this Harry Potter one up recently because I guess we realized that that's okay. I was a bit unsure if you could do that. So I think that's fine. As long as you don't put the book online, you're allowed to chop it up into little bits and do bad things to it and present results. I don't know. I mean, we've done a lot of work on that, the success and fame thing, and there's a lot of work, for instance, in music. What does it have the right structure to be a bestseller? People really want to predict that. But the thing is, there's so much social construction in that kind of success. For something to become gigantic, there's this big, I don't know what the fraction is, but it's pretty large in terms of people talking about something and making it famous. Like the Mona Lisa, for example, right? It's disappointing in real life. You're like, this is going to be the greatest thing in the world. And first of all, there are all these other humans around, which is kind of bad. And then it's not so big. It's okay. Like what's going on? So that's talk. And fame, right? Fame, the word means to speak, to talk. So it's actually, we got that right. We totally got that right. Fate means spoken. It's already been said. Fame means to talk about. It's actually word of mouth is fame. So success is not, I mean, yes, there's definitely some inherent quality to things, but you got to have a little goodness on top with people getting excited. Yes?
So I guess this may not necessarily be relevant because your measures are sort of relative to themselves, but it seemed like one of your other motivating principles at the start was a sort of idea of, I guess, a gross domestic happiness is what they call it in Bhutan, right? And I was wondering whether you had thought about, I guess there's been some studies that show that information that people share online in social networks is usually sort of more positive than their actual experience that they're having, right? That they're trying to sort of present themselves in a positive light.
Yeah.
And whether that sort of affects this.
Yeah, and so, and we acknowledge that in our papers that we're getting some version of people's presentation, which you would with a survey, you would. I mean, maybe if you sat down and spoke to someone for long enough, they'd tell you the truth. But what was I going to say about this? I think, Twitter is a voice of in itself, so it's not unhelpful to measure the whole thing. Yeah, we're kind of stuck there a little bit. I mean, the thing is not to say that Twitter, is to avoid saying this is the be-all, end-all. But yeah.
And then I guess the other question I had was,
labeling that you talked about at the beginning, and then this new labeling that you had. So in the new, it just has it has variance, but did you use the arousal and dominance?
So we didn't spend the money to get those ones as well. That would be more money, which really was a limiting factor. We didn't, and one of the reasons is that they don't, so we noticed this with ANU, they don't have the spectrum. They simply don't have the spectrum that the happiness one does. If you look at what actually how it was asked, the happiness one is a bit of everything. It actually includes excitement in the frame, the question that was presented to people. At this end you feel happier, more excited, all these things. So it's it is this big sort of dominant measure. We could do it. I think we tried to go to these other emotions. That seemed like a reasonable thing to do. But again, money is a real problem there.
And I guess that was question of follow-up questions. How did you choose those 6 polls?
Yeah, those 6. So again, this is from the psychology literature. Again, so the first one actually is about meaning space. It was meaning, trying to get meaning out of, and it's Osgood's 1950s, trying to get meaning out of expression. And they were giving people these semantic differentials, rough to smooth, whatever it is. And these 3, dominance, excitement, and valence, seem to cover as much, described a lot of the space. These other ones are more they're about emotional responses, and they have a physical manifestation as well. So there was a paper recently that suggested there are only 4, or I don't know about that one, but that's this framing of 6 seems to have been pretty strong. The McLeod book is kind of great actually in terms of drawing how they're elicited on our faces. Yeah.
I'm interested to hear a few words about your long-term interests in narratives and motifs.
Yeah, so this is a hard thing to get to. All right, so I have a crazy idea that you could somehow get out a taxonomy of human stories, right? So we have Bill's had this. So Kill the Monster, right? Beowulf. I mean, this is an essential story, and that you'll see this repeated, that motif repeated over and over and over. There's obviously romance. There's rags to riches. There's another sort of big thread. And these can be all combined in different ways. There's journey and return. You have to go and get something so your world is better. There's just simply escape, where you have to go to some other place to be in a better place. To what extent do these appear in different eras of literature? And then, of course, there are more nuanced ones and combined ones. And are they the right sort of basic motifs? Can you get that out? I mean, somehow we have to sort of. And if you work with plots, maybe you have. If you work with plots, you have, haven't you? All right, we could talk about it. So
how to represent them is a interesting and hard question.
Hard problem, right? So I have here. This is. I don't know if I should say, but okay. So all of those things, in a sense, are about survival, and so the big story that we're sort of all occupied with, and we never really necessarily say it, but it is kind of life and death, right? So, Kill the Monster is about being here tomorrow. So it's survival, but not in the sort of raw kind of survival. It's survival from just bare survival up to flourishing, which is the rags to riches kind of story. So we talk about it a lot. Romance is ultimately about making more of us, I suppose, right? So maybe there is a taxonomy of stories. I'm very interested in that possibility. I mean, I think we run on stories. I think humans are storytelling machines, and we look for stories in randomness, and we find them with great ease. This Financial Times series does this, and that's because the sports match is going, it's going in this way, so that's because of this. So I think that's an important direction to go. I would like to get to frames first. I think that would be, as I was saying before, with say Lance Armstrong and Snowden, and I know people have certainly worked on this, but I think that would be a great achievement. What are the frames being, and with what abundance are they being used around a particular topic? Yeah. So first of all, you have something that says this is a topic now, at least on social media or whatever it is, and what are the particular frames that are being used? That may never happen. You can do it.
I
have a particular question about the amount of variability in some of these, the average.
Okay, so there's
some of them with the waxes are very different. So some of them.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
5.9 to 6.1,
Yeah.
but within Harry Potter,
we're
the
doing
range was like 4 to 7 or something.
That is a huge range, actually. Yeah, and often you don't see an average going below 5. That's pretty bad. Obviously heavy metal and so on. But yeah, it does get pretty bleak in terms of our measure.
So have you done like comparisons of variables? It'll be interesting to know, like, okay, between
Yeah.
Thanksgiving and not, moves by 0.1.
Yes.
Variability between different people is a certain amount, or.
We've done a little bit of that. So, I mean, and then one good example, I think, is the variability you see on average, or how variance grows throughout the day, just on average. It widens up and we also become more negative, at least, on Twitter for a particular time period.
It might be a way to do units meeting. So
Yeah.
The 25th and 70th, 25th percentile versus 75th percentile of how happy people are.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the gap for Thanksgiving versus not, or maybe it's less. I don't know.
No, you're right. So what does it mean to go at 0.1 or 0.2? Yeah, exactly right. And so our calibrations have been various. I don't know what we'll end up with, but we have, for example, we can connect it to the Gallup poll to some extent. We can connect it to, say, something that that might be commonsensical. It might be useful to say, music genres might be the sort of, it might be helpful. People have a peg in their heads for those things. But we haven't got that exactly right. Obviously, if you're going to have a measure, that's a fundamental piece to get to. Yeah.
So Peter, anything that is designed to make me happy in the future, at least a large subset of those things, is quite likely to make me unhappy in the present. So I'm going to tweet that I'm sick of studying. I'm going to tweet that I'm sick of this job. But if I weren't in college, if I didn't have this job, I'd be a lot less happy.
Well, and I said this at the start, like happiness doesn't mean you're going to do well, right? So, right? But measuring it, who knows, right? So maybe we eventually see if you can do this well for long enough. Maybe it's just Gallup well-being. Maybe survey things. Eventually you sort of show that, all right, if the place is getting too happy, it's not functioning that well. Yeah. You got to knuckle down a little bit. Maybe we need to be a certain level of grumpiness, and then that's how you get things done. That's okay. Of course, it's framed as happiness, and this is another thing we built into language, right? I mean, happy and unhappy. We have a lot of uns, but it's usually the positive word becomes negated. But if you say not unhappy, it doesn't bring you back to happy. So. It is kind of just built into the language that the un part, at least in English, the un part is associated with it creates the negative out of the positive. I mean, it's a social tool. You'd be kind of a disappointing person if you went the other way. I am unsad today.
Have you looked at localized happiness in the 2012 presidential election? One thing that would be interesting about that is that you can see a lot of event-wise spikes in the manometer.
Yeah.
But there you know something about it. If you were getting like unbiased representation of preferences over the presidential election on Twitter, what proportionally the spikes in happiness should look like precinct by precinct.
Yeah.
It's interesting to say in these kind of precincts we get kind of a very close, tight proportional reaction to the presidential election. But maybe in like older rural precincts, there's no connection between what's going on Twitter and what happened in the presidential election. Maybe in younger, very urban precincts, you see a tight coupling between the event and what's going on Twitter.
So we'll see. It's an interesting thing going forward. We've done some of this. Other people have done some work. The thing with Twitter is now there is a lot. We're only since April, I think, roughly, we're getting a lot more. We're getting all the geotagged tweets now, which is about 1% of Twitter. So we'll have a much more, as one can get through Twitter, we'll have an ability to do that, really, I think, in the next election. One thing we did compare was, so I think it was voting precincts, and this is probably with the ANU, the original stuff, which is not great, but we looked at, as a fraction, and this is 2008, the fraction of the percentage of people that voted for Obama, that's this axis, which goes from whatever it is, like 10 to 90 sort of thing. And then plotted a couple of things. One was happiness. So happiness actually went down in the kinds of tweets that comes out of those regions. And information content went up. So we measure it. I haven't shown you that. But so that was interesting. We can definitely do it in a better way now. We have a better measure, and the data will be better. So we'll see. There's been work on trying to predict elections with Twitter, and I think maybe the last paper I saw that was about that said you can't do it was the title. Yeah. But there's more data. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, there have been some interesting things with box office prediction, although that's a bit sneaky in some ways. How much is being talked about? But that was coupled with how many cinemas the thing opened in. So that seems like a lot of information.
Yeah, I think prediction is problematic, but it's interesting if you have some ground truth measure of if Twitter will represent it, this is what we expect.
Yeah, so look, one thing I've been trying to get a student to work on for a while is just temperature. Temperature is fantastic, right? So we've got temperature. Let's just make some crazy thing that turns tweets into temperature and see how well it works. And we've gotten somewhere with that. But that seems like a really good ground truth test. Is it raining? It's raining. I mean, people are good at, I'm eating a sandwich. I mean, people are pretty good at, it's not everything they do on Twitter, but people do, enough people will say, oh my God, it's just so hot today. So that seems doable to me, and it seems like a good, I think it would be yours is a much more elevated thing. This is just very basic. But there's a lot of variability in temperature, and I think that would be a good project. You want to do it? Okay. Thank you.